For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks and fountains, and springs that flow through the valleys and hills, a land of wheat, barley, vines, fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without scarcity, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron, and whose hills are ready to be mined for copper.
The first time he came over from Italy, he couldn't take anything with him. And so he took with him the only thing he could, which is a shoot from a fig tree. Now, figs have a lot of meaning to them, both to Italian culture and in the Bible, right? In the Bible, the fig is a commonly quoted plant. Like Jesus talks to the fig tree in... drop that, because I don't know I don't know the aspect. I know it's a biblically prominent plant. I'm going to start the story over. Ready? Steady. Yeah. You cut it from here.
Okay. And we should be recording. All right. Thank you so much for coming down.
How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I mean, I'm tired. I'm very tired, but I'm doing great. Can't complain. Though, I mean, I guess great is relative, right? After a while. It is a
relative term, but I feel it. I feel it.
Yeah, you know.
So does this get edited down? Or is your
I'm going to try and edit bits and pieces of it, but I will tell you, like, after some point, she's just going to get all of you. So,
that's fair.
There's some bits I'm just not going to edit out.
You're going to get unfiltered dumb.
There you go, unfiltered
same
dumb.
As filtered dumb. But I make more mistakes.
There you go, yes. So, but do not try to make minimal amount of mistakes, because I will put them in the project and people will know that you make mistakes.
I'll see what I can do. No worries.
So, let's start by getting your name for the people hearing, because they'll love that.
I'm Dominic Mruzek.
Mruzek, okay.
That's my name.
Perfect. And we are talking today about... Well, we are talking about you, but a majority of the focus will be kind of on your grandfather, and his name is...
Leonard DiNovo.
Oh, I love that. Okay. And is there any particular meaning to his name, or is it just regular first name and surname?
DiNovo is a fairly common surname in Sicily and Italy. It means something. It might mean winemaker. No, that has vino in it. I'm not sure what DiNovo means. It might have a meaning behind it.
But yeah, right.
Leonard is the name of my great-grandfather. It is an Italian tradition that the firstborn son is always named after the father's father.
Oh, really?
Right? Oh. So it goes... I gotta think about this for a second. My mom's told me a million times. In Italian families, your first son is your father's name. Your second son's your mother's father's name. Your first daughter is your father's mother's name. And your second daughter is your mother's name.
And then what happens to the third and fourth?
Whatever you want.
Oh, then it's all. Then it's
when the
free game.
Stops.
That's where it kind of stops.
So my great grandfather was named Leonard, so therefore my grandfather's name is Leonard.
I gotcha. So that I take it then he was the firstborn.
Yeah.
Of your,
yeah.
Gotcha.
And if you go over to like my aunt's kids, Leo, my cousin, is named after my grandfather because his father was also named Leonard.
Oh, there you go.
So it flows.
There's just a bunch of Leos.
Yeah, there's a lot of Leos in my family. There's a lot of Lens and Leonard. Leo is short for Leonard. It's not, but we go for it.
We just go for it. It's just a lot. So then, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So your mother is, where does she fall on the totem pole of children?
My mother is the second born to my grandfather.
Second born to your grandfather.
My grandfather had 6. I'm doing a lot of thinking right now. I'm trying to count the aunts.
There you go.
Pasquale, Nace, Ignatius. Yeah, 6 children.
Okay.
One of which died young. So I have my mother and then 3 uncles and 1 aunt.
I gotcha. 3 uncles and 2. Okay.
There's 5 total kids.
Fuck yeah.
That's out of the family.
Okay, nice. Out of curiosity, how many siblings do you have?
I have 3. They're all brothers. They're all older. Which just is unrelated to the Italian side of the family. My father, who's Polish, his grandfather was the youngest of 4 boys. And my dad's the youngest of 4 boys. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. So if history repeats, I will have 4 sons.
You will also have 4 sons.
I kind of hope not. I kind of hope I get daughters, but you don't really get to decide that, do you?
No. As we have learned throughout history, you do not get to decide who your kids are. It will surprise you.
Yeah, no.
Why daughters? Just because
Daughters
nice.
seem fun,
They do seem fun.
I'm not a sports person. Put it that way.
Just in general, your sons will bowl over you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the same way. If I have kids or sons,
I do a lot of babysitting, but every time I babysit, it's always for daughters. I don't think I've ever babysitted a boy.
hey,
So I need some more experience in that.
I get that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
a bit of a pivot, but again, like I said, at this point, I'm including everything. I think it all has valid, so to speak. It's supposed to be a friendly conversation. I want to make this as comfortable as possible. But pivoting back to your grandfather, so one important thing, right? I mean, we always talk about World War II. And the funny thing about World War II, though, is that, I mean, there are some major events that have taken place, like the Holocaust, because I think people talk about it a lot. It's a little insane, like how that kind of blew up to like this big kind of tragic event. But World War II affected a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. People who were directly involved or who weren't. It changed the entire landscape of the world as we know it.
Yeah, World War II is pretty big.
It's
Understatement of the century right there. Right?
Understatement of the century. World War II. It's almost like the whole world was at war. I don't know.
That is, yes.
Kind of seems like it, right?
War at the world. That does make sense.
It does.
It seems like a logical conclusion the word said, yes.
Logical conclusion indeed. So that I guess you told me a little bit about your grandfather.
Yeah.
I mean, it's somewhat directly related to World War II because it was during the rise of the fascist party, right? Or that is nationalist. Well, I might be.
It'd be fascism in Italy, with Mussolini.
Gotcha, fascismo. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your grandfather's life in Sicily before he emigrated.
So my grandfather was born in 1932 in a little town called Termini, which is just east. I'm picturing the map of Sicily in my head. It's just east of Palermo, which is the big city in Sicily. It's the big one that's on the map, the capital of Sicily.
Gosh.
Just east, little town of Termini.
How do you spell that?
Terimi. Termini.
I love that. Okay.
Termini is a big farming community. Nowadays there's a college there, so it's kind of like an education community, but 1932 was a big farming community. A lot of vines, a lot of olives, and a lot of goats. He was a goat farmer.
Olives, goats, and I love that. Okay, he was a goat farmer.
I'm not sure how many siblings he had. It was Italy in the 1930s, so many is the answer to that. I know he had at least 2 sisters, and I think he had a couple of brothers too. Most of them are still over in Italy. Most of their family is still over in Italy.
I see.
Today. But he was born in 1932, and Mussolini took power in 36. And he was a kid, right? 32, 36, that's 4 years. He was about 4 years old when Mussolini took power. Maybe 5 or 6 when Mussolini really started to make some changes into the political landscape of Italy. So my grandfather went to a school run by the Catholics. There were kind of public schools in Italy in the 1930s, but they weren't really great because it's Italy in the 1930s. They haven't quite figured things out yet. But he went to a Catholic school under the town's local priest at the church, right? Now, Mussolini did not like the Catholics. Now, he did not like the Catholics. It's kind of a... Yeah, I guess it's the truism. He didn't like the Catholics a whole lot, right?
Right.
For a whole slew of reasons. The main one being that Mussolini wanted to get involved a lot with Hitler and his domination over Europe. They wanted to, become allies, keep cows, and the Vatican didn't really think that was a good idea.
Right.
I'm using extremely vague layman's term mainly because I don't know the history a whole. I'm not a historian.
Right. No.
But the way it's been described to me is that Mussolini and Hitler wanted to become friends, more like allies, and partner up to take over Europe. And the Vatican was like, you shouldn't do that. Mussolini was like, no. There was a whole back and forth a little bit there, right? And now, Mussolini had his hands tied behind his back a little bit because the vast majority of Italians in 1930 are Catholic. Right? So the Vatican, the Pope, rather, because the Vatican wouldn't be established yet, but the Pope had, the Holy See had the popular vote in Italy, right? So if the Pope whoever was Pope in 1932, might be one of the Benedicts, was like, Mussolini, this fascismo was bad. Most of Italians would go for it, right? They would agree with the Pope. Now, when Mussolini took power for the Italian Senate, he tried everything he could to kind of suppress the Pope's power. And he, for the most part, succeeded at kind of immobilizing the Pope during this time. And one of the things that he did, which affected my grandfather, is that he closed down Catholic schools. Right? My grandfather, remember that one time he went home to his mother and said, he would have been like 6 at the time. Right? He was like, Ma, the teachers, they took down all the crosses at the school. They're gonna redo the school. And ever since that day, my great-grandmother would never send my grandfather to school again. Because it was the day they took the crosses down. I'm like, nah, it's going downhill.
This going down.
So they could see the writing on the walls.
Yeah, right.
Right, so my grandfather, he stopped going to school, which means he never received an education, right? That's kind of that's the critical point here, is that he was illiterate for his entire life. He couldn't read, he could not write. Right? And then World War II happened. I don't know a whole lot of stories from exactly those 2 time periods. He never really talked a whole lot about the war. He talked about before the war a little bit. He talked about a lot about what happened after the war, but the war itself, he was pretty mute on.
Was he? Do you know if he was involved at all, or was it just?
He would have been a kid doing most of this, right? They don't draft kids.
Well, no,
not to the very end when they got desperate. But
they did?
Yeah, my grandfather never fought though. Yeah, a little tidbit. The Germans, when they were like, the Russians are coming in from the west, right, and they're banging on Berlin's door.
Yeah.
Hitler got desperate and just started drafting teenagers into the war cause.
Wow. Okay.
Which is really brutal because it's a losing war. You're going to lose. So
why do that?
You're pretty much sentencing these 15-year-olds to death. That's pretty much what you're doing. It's really nasty stuff. But I don't really know. I'm assuming Mussolini would do something like that, but I actually don't know. Off the top of my head. But regardless, my grandfather was never drafted or anything like that. He was a kid. Right? His dad might have been involved in one way or another, but his dad was also, because he was a goat farmer, part of the agricultural system, which was relatively safe because people needed food. No matter what you do, food is always a staple.
Right.
So in Italy, my grandfather was pretty much in the poverty parts of Italy. He was never a rich man. He was very poor growing up. And the whole family was. Goat farming, not a whole lot of money in goat farming, right? They had enough to get by. They weren't below the poverty line, but they were right on it. I do remember, he used to tell stories to us all the time, little snippets. I do remember one story he used to tell us is that the Americans came to Italy, right? This had been like 1944, 43. And they went up for Italy and they liberated Italy. This is after D-Day, and the British, the Americans, the Canadians were mowing through France to liberate France. And my grandfather was telling a story that he saw this American kind of camp where the Americans were staying while they were prepping to move north.
Right.
And in this camp, he recalled seeing Americans, and they would throw away food when they were done. And he was blown away by this, because he would never throw away food. And he thought to himself, he said to himself that day right there, that I want to live in a country where I can afford to throw away food. I mean, he told me this 1,000 times. America is like a dreamland, because Americans, they can throw away food. They must be billionaires over in America. That's the message he took away from it, right? And so the war happened, and then it ended. And after the war, Italy was pretty well crushed, right? And they were on the Axis powers too, so they were on the losing side of the war. And so after the war, Italy had a very strong financial hardship and struggles after that. And it was really bad if you weren't rich, pretty much. If you were in the lower 90% of the Italian population, it got pretty bad. And there was a lot of talk about revolts and a lot of talk about this and a lot of talk about that. And my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather, Leonard's parents, were like, this is, writing is on a wall. There's this great place called America we've heard of. We know it's nice there. So they sold most of their goats in the farm, right? And they powered together all of their money. And they were able to afford 2 tickets for my grandfather, Leonard, and his sister, whose name is blanking on me. I'm picturing her face right now. It's not Rosemary. Aunt Rosemary. No, it's not Rosemary. I should have had my mom write down all these names for me. She would remember. It's my great aunt, Rosemary, something like that.
Rosa? Not Rosa.
No, not Rosa. I'm embarrassed I don't know it. I should totally know this. In fact, I'm going to text my mom right now and try to give this a live response. I've seen her. I saw her just like last year, right?
She's better.
She's still kicking too. It's going to be so sad when I forget her name. I always forget her name. It's like Rosemary, but it's not Rosemary.
Oh man, I was thinking, I thought she must have died young and you've never met her. No, you saw her. You saw her last.
She's still kicking. She's just turned. She's got to be in her early 90s now. She's old.
Wow.
She might even be approaching the triple digits in age, right?
That's impressive. You saw her last month.
But where was I? I was talking about...
We were talking about... Oh, yes. So Len had ended up in...
So Leonard ended up in Cleveland, Ohio, right? And if you don't... The only thing he could really do is manual labor, right?
Yeah.
Because he can't read, he can't write, so he can never do any sort of clerical work.
Yeah.
And he's not educated.
Right.
And he's not a big guy either. He's small, right? They're all small, right? Our whole family... No, we'll get there because it's not entirely true. But he's a really small guy, maybe like 5'4", 5'2". So he's a little tiny little guy. But in Cleveland, Ohio, and this would have been like 1952, 1953, thereabouts, pretty much the only company that will hire non-American immigrants who don't speak or don't read is CGE, Cleveland Gas and Electric.
Okay.
So he got hired in as manual labor for gas and electric, right? So he spent the first 30 years in America, he dug ditches pretty much every single day, right? Wow. He took the midnight shift at the gas company where he would, the first half of his career, he would just dig ditches for gas. Is in the 50s, right after the war. It's a little bit after the war, maybe just like right after the war is like 1946, 1947. This is a couple years after that. But the suburbs around East Cleveland and into like Akron and the suburbs into Mentor, all in Cleveland, like East Cleveland, the whole area, were being built up, right? Which means every house gets gas, and every house had to have a trench dig. And in the 50s, they just dug them by hand, with shovels. That's what he did. That's his job.
And that's what he did for 30 years.
He did that for a very long time. He did that 52. He pretty much did that until he couldn't dig ditches anymore. And then they put him on a truck. And he drove a truck. That's what he did.
They worked him to the bone.
They worked him to the bone until he must have been in his 40s or 50s when he was just incapable of holding a shovel anymore. Right? He was just he was too decrepit. And so they gave him a truck and they gave him the night shift. And his job was to wait and, you get a call from the guy saying, I smell gas in my house. It was his job to go out there, sniff it out, and see if it's actually leaking.
No.
That was his job.
Right, okay.
After he dug ditches.
Right.
So that's the job that he had. And he was immensely thankful for it because it's money, right? It's work. He could do it. This is a job he could do.
Right.
It was about this time he met my grandmother, who is, I'm trying to remember her surname. It eludes me right now. Frances DiNovo is what she was married into. It might be Frances...
Hold that thought. I'm just trying to make sure my mic isn't completely dead.
Did it go off?
No, it's still on. It's just conserving energy. Francis, is that spelled the way it sounds?
Oh, yeah, like the same.
All right, gotcha.
Francis. Honestly, a lot of these names, like Leonard or Josie or Francis, they've been Americanized.
Oh, yeah.
So the original names, which I don't know how to spell, it might have been like Francisco. But like Leonard's full name might be, I don't know what the full name of Leonard is. Leonardo, maybe?
Maybe.
Or like Josie is short for Josephine. Right? Because that's the full name for Josie. It's Josephine. Everyone knows Josephine, but people call him Josie because Josephine is too Italian. Right? So they try to make the names a bit more American.
Assimilate a little.
Yeah. So Francis is spelled exactly the same. Same Francis. Same way.
Same way.
They would have met in the late 50s, my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandmother is an immigrant, but she moved here when she was 2. So by any practical means, she's raised American. Her parents moved here from Palermo as well. Palermo is the city that Termini is like kind of right next to, but they grew up in Palermo, London's from Termini. So they grew up in the same part of the world, Sicily, right? That's how they met. They both know Sicily, and they met because they both know Italian. Not just Italian, Sicilian Italian, which is a different dialect of Italian. It's a different. So Roman Italian is this kind if you ever go on like Duolingo, right? You'll learn Roman Italian, which is proper Italian. But Sicilian Italian, it's different. It's different words, different phrasings. You can think of it a little bit like if you go to like the English spoke in New York City is different than English spoken in Puerto Rico.
Right,
because they've evolved differently and they have a different dialect to them.
You're right. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. So they kind of connected over having a shared.
They had a shared language. I don't really know how they met. My mom told me one story, and then my grandfather told me a different story. I don't really know which one's true. Right, I don't really know. My mom says that they met in the soup kitchen because my grandfather couldn't afford food, so they went to the soup kitchen, and my grandmother was serving out soup. That's how they met. But another time, my grandmother met him at a bar. I don't know how they met. That's not really important.
Between bar or soup kitchen.
Yeah, who knows? That's an unknown. That's like an unknowable thing of history. They may have met for the church. I don't 100% know.
Bar, soup kitchen, or church.
Yeah, the Holy Trinity right there.
The whole
of meeting points.
I get it. Right.
But they met, and this would have been the late 50s, and they got married in 1960. They got married, for the time, I guess, average. You know, usually Italian Catholics get married young. It's like an Italian Catholic thing. We get married at 20, 21, 22. 1960, 1932, that is you would have been about 27, 28.
27.
It's a little bit later in life. I mean, nowadays, people get married at 28, 30, 35 pretty regularly.
Yeah, right.
The marriage kind of moved back a little bit.
Just a little bit.
It was a smidge. But in the 50s, that was kind of late. Completely unrelated. That's just a tidbit. They got married, and then they moved into a house out in... Well, I think the first house was in East Cleveland, which is a really seedy part of Cleveland. It's like the cheap part of... Think of, like, city of Rochester is equivalent to, like, 19th Ward. The city of Rochester. Like, nobody really wants to live there, but it's cheap, so people do.
Right.
They lived there for a couple of years. My grandmother took a role as a secretary in some sort of business downtown. I don't know what the business was called. I just know this location. If you ever look at the Cleveland skyline, there's this huge tower right in the middle. It's the Key Bank Tower. Google it sometime. You'll see it's obvious. There's a huge 1930s neo-Gothic tower. She worked in the basement of that tower. They put all the accountants who would take the higher-ups would have a letter, so they dictate it into a mic, into a tape, and then send it down, and then my grandmother would type it out into actual letters and mail it, and that was her job for a long time.
Nice.
Nowadays, that job is just computers.
Yeah,
but in the 50s and the 60s, that was actually a job.
You needed actual hands to be able to do that.
You needed actual hands to do that. So that's what they did. And then they moved to the Newberry residence. Newberry, Ohio is a suburb way out in the country. Think like Brockwood to Rochester. It's like way out there in the middle of nowhere. And they bought a house there. This would have been, I don't know, late 60s.
Why?
Early 70s.
Why'd they move?
East Cleveland's not a nice place to live.
East
Cleveland's not a nice place to have a family.
Already. It's like it's terrible there.
it's not.
But
it's improved, but it's not amazing.
And now, maybe I misheard you. I apologize because a friend was walking past, but I misheard you. So they moved where?
This has been the late 60s, early 70s, to Newberry, Ohio.
Newberry, Ohio. Gotcha.
Which is a little country town suburb, just by Mentor. I don't know why I'm telling you these things, because I don't know how well you know Cleveland, Ohio. I know really well, because I go there like 3-4 times a year to see family. So like, this whole East Cleveland is north of Akron. This whole area I know pretty well.
Yeah, you're familiar with it.
I'm pretty familiar with the area. I had like 2 of my brothers went to John Carroll. Right, that's right in East Cleveland. Not bad East Cleveland. That's right by.
The OK East Cleveland.
Yeah. There's like different little suburbs. I'm trying to remember the names of. Not Mayfield. No, yeah, Mayfield Heights, right by there. That whole University Heights, Mayfield Heights. That's where my aunt lives. That's pretty alright. It's right by the college.
Oh, yeah.
But they moved into this house in Newberry. We call this a Newberry residence, and that's where they lived until they passed away. So that's the house I know, right? So my grandmother was around. She died in 2020.
2020.
So relatively recently, right? Like I have distinct memories of her. I knew her pretty well.
Mm.
And she lived in the Newberry house in Cleveland. in Newberry. It was it was hideous. It was this 1970s. It was like brownie brown house with a bright red chimney. It made no sense.
Put this in my
I'm sure it made sense
notes.
in the 70s to the architects who designed it.
Hideous friggin' house.
I don't know what they paid for it. It was pretty damn cheap because it's in the middle of nowhere. And it was the 70s too. Houses were cheaper back then. But they saved enough money to buy that house. And when they bought that house, before they bought that house, the oldest was born, Pasquale, Uncle Pasquale, who, I don't know when he's born. I should know his age, but I don't know his age. My guess is he was born in 1962. I really don't know about that time frame. But,
just an estimate,
so
right?
Pasquale was born, and then my mother was born in 1965.
What is your mother's name? We never got around to that.
Maria.
Maria.
She's Maria.
Maria.
My mother. In 1965. And then Ignatius was born at some point. And I know they're all like Catholically Italian names, I know. Ignatius was born at some point. And then Marco was born. I don't know which one's older and which one's younger. In my head, they're all the same age, which is the age of an uncle. And then Marco was born, and then Lisa was born a couple years later. Lisa's the youngest.
Lisa is the youngest.
Lisa's the youngest. She would have been born 1973, 1970. Marco was born. I don't know which one's older and which one's younger. In my head, they're all the same age, which is the age of an uncle. And then Marco was born, and then Lisa was born a couple years later. Lisa's the youngest.
Lisa is the youngest.
Lisa's the youngest. She would have been born 1973, 1974. And there was another one in there too, which is Rosemary. That's her name. That's why I keep thinking of Rosemary. Rosemary, she was born with polio. And it was right at the cusp when they figured out how to cure polio. But she was on the wrong side of that cusp. So she passed away at 4. She was young when she went away.
Rosemary.
So Leonard married my grandmother in the 60s, 1960. And they moved to the house in Newberry. And it seems weird that I've noticed about people in general. I had to take a class in high school called The American Dream. Right, that was a class. It was all about trying to discover what the American dream is, and whether or not the American dream is still true, right? And when you ask people what the American dream is, like, what is the American dream to you? Like, what would you say it is?
The American dream to me is probably, very vaguely, I just want to be left alone. So freedom, I guess.
Just freedom. Fair enough. A lot of people I've met describe the American dream as kind of
it's potential spam.
Potential spam.
That's the benefit of using my phone as a camera. I get spam calls while I'm recording.
A lot of people describe the American dream as, you gotta live in the suburbs, and you have a wife and kids, and you have a car, and you get to go camping on the weekends, and you relative financial stability, and that's the American dream. And in a sense, I understand that, and I see that, and I do want that, but I don't think that is the American dream. I think the American dream is what my grandfather had, right? So he immigrated here from Italy, and he had nothing at all. Nothing, like he didn't speak the language, he had no money, he had no future to speak of. And despite that, because he worked hard, and he surrounded himself with great people, he was able to send all of his kids to college. That, to me, feels much more like the American dream, in the sense that the American dream is to better your life, despite the fact that you have no ability to, right? No license to, right? Like, he bettered his life for his family, despite the fact that there was no reason why he should have. But he still did. That's the American dream. He was able to send all of his kids to college, right? Like, my mother went to college, all of the aunts and uncles went to college. My grandfather was able to pay for it because he worked really hard. And if he worked that hard in Italy, he would not have been able to pay for that. Like, Italy's economy, it's still pretty shit. But back then it was worse. But in America, you can do that, right? And we see this all the time too. Like, America's the highest immigration rate out of any country in the world. And a huge reason because of that is because if you work hard, it still stands that if you work hard, you can send your kids to college and you can nearly guarantee a better life for your kids. Not a perfect life. There is no perfect life.
Obviously, yeah.
That doesn't exist, but a better life than what you had. Right? That's exactly what my grandfather wanted for him. He worked hard, but because he worked hard, he's able to send all of my kids, all of my aunts and uncles to college. My mother told me one time that my grandfather was always a really happy man because he loved America and he just was in general a very optimistic kind of guy. Because I guess it's just what happens when you live in Ohio, apparently. Whatever. Right?
He's just happy all the time.
Yeah, I was a very happy man, and he never cried ever, except when he saw his last kid cross the stage, Aunt Lisa, at her graduation. He cried because he knew that he did it. It's tears of joy. Like my mother used to, still tells me that every once in a while that Leonard never cried except for when he finished what he had to do, and then he did. It was just pure tears of joy, and that warms my heart to know that it is still real. It's like almost like a fairy tale, but fairy tales are fairy tales for a reason. Sometimes they're true, you know. But does that work for you as a video? I'm trying to figure out the points I can make as a closing line.
Let's close with a story. You told me but then we can talk about that a little bit later. But you had mentioned a fig tree branch that your grandfather had brought.
Oh, the fig.
Yeah.
I can send you a picture of the fig, and then you'll have an image of the fig for your presentation.
That's perfect.
If it's not wrapped, there's other images of the fig. My grandfather came over from Italy for the first time. He really couldn't take anything with him, right? Because he can't take luggage with him. And so he took a shoot from a fig tree. Now, fig has a lot of prominence, in both in Italian culture, right? Figs are popular over in Italy. There's a lot of meaning behind them. And in the Bible, and he's a Catholic, right? So we took a fig. Now, figs don't really have seeds in the same way other plants do. They have seeds in the fig, right? Little tiny little pebbly things, but they don't grow. They're not fertile. They were non-fertile seeds. Instead, figs reproduce by, you have to cut a shoot off of it, and you put that on the ground, and it'll just become a new fig. So figs, naturally occurring figs, all kind of appear in a big group. It's because it's all one plant, and they grow in the ground, and they sprout up. That's how the fig grows. And so my grandfather took a branch off it and soaked it and put it into a little handkerchief that's wet and just stuffed it in a coat pocket. And when he came here, he planted that in the ground, and he kept the fig. And it's the fig of Italy, and he had to keep the fig. It's like almost what kept him going in the hard times. He had to keep this fig going. And figs don't grow in Cleveland, Ohio. Like, Cleveland's cold. All the Great Lake cities are cold.
Right.
In the winter, and figs are tropical plants. So every winter, he'd wrap the fig in blankets, then bend the whole thing to the ground and bury it. He would bury the fig. And in the spring, he would unbury the fig and put the fig back up, and it would still be green because it doesn't know to kill its leaves like other plants do. It'd be frozen, and you'd have to chop off the frozen bits and let it regrow itself into a bush. Right? But he kept doing this. It's become the family fig, and because of the way figs grow, they don't really die. They're almost like an eternal plant. They will die eventually because all living things are non-eternal. But this same fig, a shoot's been taken off and given to Pasquale, Uncle Pasquale. He has a fig in his garden, and a shoot's been given off and given to all of my aunts, all of my uncles, including my mother, who has a shoot of this fig. And this fig is now in our garden. It's a big plant, too. It's like to the ceiling in here, right? It's a big plant. It's almost a tree. We can't grow a tree. Because to have a tree, it must grow continuously, and we have to cut it off every winter. So ours is much more of a bush than a tree. But every winter, we wrap it, and we bend it to the ground and bury it, so it stays alive. And just recently, I've taken a shoot off of this tree to grow into my own fig. And hopefully the cycle will continue. Because figs do last a very long time if you grow it like this and continue. This is kind of how figs reproduce, is they just have little shoots taken off of them.
For he ruled over all the kingdoms west of the Euphrates River, from Tipsah to Gaza, and had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, lived in safety, everyone under their own vine and under their own fig tree.